Ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to discuss my thoughts after having put a good day's worth of playing into the closed alpha playtest for Vampire the Masquerade Blood Hunt, which is an upcoming battle royale in the IP universe of Vampire the Masquerade. So what is it? It's a class-based battle royale. So you'll select what they're calling archetypes, which is just a class that comes with a passive, an ability, and a stronger ability. And then you jump into a battle royale format where you're able to land in a city, loot, get stronger. Then this black or this red mist comes in and will start pushing you towards the center. They do a couple things different that I really liked. And I think overall this game shows a lot of promise. And it was probably one of the more stable alphas I've played. There weren't that many issues that detracted from the experience. And I was kind of expecting them for an alpha, but overall, the gameplay was fun. So let's go through my thoughts, my personal opinion. Again, this is just the opinion of one person, so I'm gonna kind of give you my perspective as a gamer and then a little perspective as a former developer. And then we'll just kind of go through what I saw and things that I liked. So let's get into it. First thing to note is the map is surprisingly small, and I actually enjoyed this aspect. So most battle royales, and there's tons of them now, have very large maps, right? You want to make sure that you can get anywhere from 60 to 100 people spread out enough where they're not all fighting at once, and then the fog is useful to force people into engagements later on in the game. So the map itself doesn't take that long to traverse from one end to the other. However, the way they counteract this from being an issue is they made the map a lot more complex. From a level design perspective, there is a crap ton of verticality. There's a lot of detail. There's a lot of surfaces. There's the sight lines are actually kind of bonkers, right? So if you step out into a line of sight and you look out to where the enemies possibly could be, the possibilities are quite numerous, because it's not just, you know, like you get with like a PUBG or something where there's one or two horizon lines that you have to look at, right? Maybe there's like the base horizon in front of you where they could be standing on the ground, and maybe there's like a first or second floor you could look at, but actually they could be everywhere. So that there's really tall buildings, there's alcoves, there's little inlets, there's ways to go underneath buildings in the construction and demolition areas. There's ways to go underneath rubble, through cars, through a garage, right? There's all these different places to go. And so the level design is actually quite complicated, which is really cool, and it makes the small map size actually work quite well, because even though you may be within a reasonable distance of another player, the chances of you guys seeing each other and encountering each other goes down, because you have to be at the right line of sight and you have to be at the right elevation and all that. So I think that the map design is really cool and fits not only the IP of Vampire the Masquerade, being that kind of Prague style Czech vampire, really fancy kind of area, but it also makes the gameplay different and interesting. Going through the gameplay a little bit, what you see on screen here, you have two weapon slots. You can put any two weapons you want into these, and there are weapon rarities. With the weapon rarities, they go up in what seems like damage per hit, as well as clip size. So you can imagine some of the harder hitting weapons having bigger clips is very useful. And then you get a melee weapon that have higher rarities. You're able to get, at least in the alpha, two weapons, the double blades and the katana, that have special abilities. So the double blades, if you right click on PC, you will dash forward and do a slash attack. And then the katana, if you right click, you will deflect bullets for about 1.5 seconds, which is pretty cool. So the higher rarity melee weapons get really strong. And the two weapons, there's actually a very wide variety of weapons. And I think one thing I like about the weapon choices and the weapon design in Blood Hunt is they're actually quite different. Between damage, fall off, fire rate, projectile versus hit scan, there's a lot of different ways that you can play and ways that you can use your weapons. So like the close range weapons have pretty significant fall off and pretty significant spread and inaccuracy, which means that you're more encouraged to use the longer range weapons at distance, and you're really punished for using close range weapons at medium to long range. And there's also some pretty different weapons. There's a crossbow that has 1 round in it, and when you fire it, it will release a big gas cloud that does damage over time in the area. And then they have dual crossbows, which are projectile based that explode on impact. And so there's just different ways you can use weapons, which actually had ended up being pretty darn cool. You can press X at any time on PC with a cooldown, of course, to do heightened senses. And this is a few things which I thought added to the gameplay a lot. One is it allows you to see through walls for anything that's revealed. So if you see any like boxes here, you'll see you grab this legendary box, any loot piles or loot caches, you can see through walls so you can know where the loot is, which kind of simplifies the looting process. You just need to go and find the loot, and you can find that through the heightened senses. But it also, if you see another vampire in actual line of sight, like you actually physically see them, they'll glow red while you have heightened senses up. And then if you scan, you'll see any mortals that might have special blood that'll give you powers. And it also increases your hearing, which is very nice for a competitive shooter. When you have heightened senses up, your ability to hear other players goes up quite significantly. So you can do some really cool stuff with that. In the bottom left, you'll see your health, which goes up to 200 in the alpha. And then you have armor that goes on top of that, one cell of armor. And then you have these 4 buff categories down there as well. You'll see the teal, the purple, the pink, and the orange. These are buffs that give you benefits. 2 of them, the far left, the blue, the teal, and the purple, what they did for you is they lowered the cooldown for either your Q ability or they lowered the cooldown for your E ability. The pink gives you a passive health regen, which is super nice going from fight to fight without having to use as many consumables. And then the orange gives you increased melee damage. Each circle that is on above those buffs is an application of that buff, and you get the buffs from eating or feeding on mortals that have a specific blood type. So if you do a scan and you see that there's a mortal with blue blood, you can eat them or feed on them to get that benefit. And it actually works really, really well to build up. At base, you only have, I believe, 3 buff stacks that you can get. And the way you increase this to get more buffs is you have to feed on enemy players, which is nice. It means that people can't loot the whole game long, get super crazy strong, and then be unbeatable at the end of the game with crazy HP regen and insane melee damage, right? So there's that going on for them. So you just keep feeding on enemy players to increase that, and encourages you to execute players over just shooting them, which is really nice as well. These spawn locations at the beginning of the game are fixed. So what you do is you'll click on the map, and you'll be able to, it'll automatically choose the closest spawn location to that. And what this does is it means that people can't spawn on each other, not directly. You can spawn near each other and fights can happen immediately as soon as you land, but it means you won't spawn like within 10 feet of each other. Like it's all fixed spawn locations, which is kind of nice, especially with the scan and the fact that you can hear enemy players. If you want to go in an early engagement, you can. There's hot zones, like high tier loot zones that change every time you load up a match. So you'll be able to kind of interact that way. But it does mean that there's like a little bit more stability to where the spawns are. And it means you don't have to drop into the map every single time, right? You just spawn into the game. You get 5 seconds at the start to scan near you, see where you're going to go. And then the game starts and you move from there, which is pretty cool. The map itself felt really good. It had really interesting points of interest. There's a nightclub area. There's a butchery, some like a hospital. There's a construction area. It feels very different, and I'm actually really excited to see new maps as well, because this one I think plays well and has a cool aesthetic to it. Like the overall, overall art direction for it is really great, and I think that fits into it nicely. Another thing that they have that most battle royales don't have is PvE aspects in it, which isn't really just. I shouldn't call it PvE because it's not really like player versus environment in that way. So you have mortals that are running around, like they're just regular humans that are just out. You see one puking here in the corner, but they're just kind of living their life here in the city, right? And so they have a different interaction than most of what I've seen in battle royales. And then you also have hunters, which are the vampire hunters. They are all armored, they're soldiers, they have weapons, and they shoot you. So you think normally, okay, it's not a big deal, I'll just kill them, right? You feed on the mortals and you kill the hunters. But there's a very punishing mechanic in the game that makes that interaction more interesting. And that's in line with the IP of Vampire the Masquerade. And the whole idea of the IP is that you are a vampire, but you must maintain the masquerade. You must not let any of the mortals know that you're a vampire. So if you ever do anything that lets people know you're a vampire, if you kill a mortal of any kind, if you feed on someone and a mortal sees you, or if you use your powers and a mortal sees you, you become revealed to the entire map for 60 seconds. Now, I can see this time duration changing because it's incredibly punishing. I liked it because it added to the immersion of the game, and it makes you really adjust your gameplay to make sure that mortals never see you feed. Like if there's two mortals next to each other, I would shoot the ground to scare one away and then feed on the other one so that they don't see me doing it. And you also can't kill hunters in that way, right? You can't just go through and kill a big swath of hunters because you'll be revealed for 60 seconds. And imagine landing in a battle royale where the entire server can see you through walls for a full minute. You become the #1 target and everyone comes to just gank you and kill you, and it gets really rough. So you're very careful not to let any mortals see you or know that you're a vampire, which I think is a cool mechanic. On top of that, the fact that these mortals react to you is a nice way to track down enemy players. So if you ever see a hunter shooting, you know that they're shooting at a vampire because they're not going to shoot at anything else. They're not going to shoot at regular people. They're not shooting at cars. They're shooting at vampires. And so if you hear a hunter shooting or you see a hunter shooting and they actually have a red dot line that goes from them to what they're shooting at, you know there's a player there. So there's an easy way to know that there's players around. On top of that, if a mortal gets spooked either by a gunshot or they see a vampire or something spooks them, they will run away from whatever spooked them. So if you ever see a human on the street running, you know that in the opposite direction, it's very likely that there's another player there. And so it's an easy way to kind of feed into and get the environment feeling more enriched. You also have car alarms that go off. If you shoot a car or land on a car or bump into it too hard, the alarm will go off, which is another way to find other players. And there's also loot sites like a gun shop, an antique shop that has melee weapons, and a pharmacy which has consumables for healing. When they start out locked and you can open them, but the first time they're opened, they set off an alarm because you're breaking in. So if you ever hear that alarm, you know another player just went into one of those loot sites, so you can run over there and gank them from behind and try and get some action started. So between the car alarms, the alarms for breaking in, the mortals, and the hunters, you have constant notifications of people around you, and it makes the city feel a lot more alive, and it's easier to find engagements where you're not just running around. I would say in this game, the action is very tight in that there are moments where you're just kind of running and hiding and setting up, but the action feels near constant, where you're always wondering, okay, who's that over there? What's going on? How am I going to position myself? What should I do about this, right? So there's a lot of different ways that the map starts to come alive, which feels good to me. The traversal feels good too, and it's probably one of the best things about the game. You can climb anything you want by holding space. You can kind of slide on walls and run on walls as well. And you can also slide if you hold crouch right when you are in sprint with enough momentum, you'll slide. And you can use this to gain momentum to jump. You can use this to get over walls. You can get some distance. And on top of that, if you aim down sights while you're in the air, this is baseline for the game, you will slow fall. So you actually will slow your fall down, which allows you to jump over someone, hold down ADS, and then shoot down on them from above. Now, it makes you an easy target in the air, but it also allows you to, I was using it to glide between buildings without having to use movement abilities. So you can just jump and then ADS over. It only lasts a few seconds, but it's enough to kind of get you from building to building, which is pretty cool. The looting is very simple in this game. You have armor, you have ammo, you have weapons, and you have consumables. There's not that many consumables. Now, they could be adding more because this is just an alpha. This is a pharmacy that I'm looting right here. And so there might be more added, but it was very easy to just walk over and auto pick up ammo. The weapons were very simple. You only have 2 healing consumables, and then you have armor. So like, you're not spending a lot of time managing your inventory. You're kind of managing what weapons you want to have, but the looting is very straightforward and very streamlined, which some people might see as a negative. I enjoyed it because it meant that I was spending more time fighting and less time looting and managing inventory. And that kind of aspect, I think, added to the craziness of the combat and how often you run into people. The classes felt very different and distinct, and their abilities felt like they had very strong impact. So you have currently in the alpha 6 classes with there's 6 archetypes is what they call them, and they fall into 3 categories. There's which is their clan, right? Their vampire clan. The Muse and the Siren have an illusion blink, kind of like a Mesmer in Guild Wars. Have you ever seen that? And then they have the Muse has a AoE heal and can use abilities while downed. The Siren has AoE blind and damage, which you can use after using the image too, which works well with the ability. The two Nosferatu vampires have an instant high movement speed stealth, which is incredibly powerful for repositioning and even for using melee and getting behind people. And then the two Brajas, I'm probably saying that wrong, but they have a really big, strong leap that they can use while in the air as well. So they can get some real serious movement out of that. And then they have like passives that make them tankier. And they have, there's revealing for the Prowler. The Saboteur has a bomb and can do mini stealth by crouching. All the abilities felt very strong. I played only solos, so I didn't get a chance to do any of the abilities in group play, which I'm sure would change it drastically. But overall, it felt like the abilities were powerful. I definitely found a reason to respect each archetype I went up against and what they did. Because a lot of times it was just you had to play differently based on what they were and how they played against you. And it also meant that different weapons and different times of the game got amplified for characters, right? So when I first played the Prowler, which is they have a tracking passive. When an enemy gets low, you get to follow their blood trail to see where they went. And then their ability is an AoE sonar, so they shoot out bats and it reveals people in an area, which you would think relative to be able to block bullets or being able to heal or being able to blind people or any of that stuff, just revealing by itself in very high action combat doesn't seem like it would be as on par. But as the circle gets smaller, the Prowler gets better and better, right? So when you get to the final circle, playing as the Prowler or playing against Prowlers, when they have their bats out, which last a long time, it gets very difficult to face them because they know exactly where you are. And the bats are lingering, revealing, and you have to kind of reposition when you really don't want to. So based on the time of the game, the abilities get stronger or weaker, and I think that adds to the gameplay quite a lot. And I would say I had a great time playing the game. There's some really cool mechanics. It felt very smooth and fluid. The movement was good. The traversal was cool. And even though we've been playing tons and tons of battle royales for so long, it starts to feel very samey. And I think this one does enough to not only bring in the IP of Vampire the Masquerade, but also feel a little bit different in that aspect and kind of give some new vibes to the gameplay that you'll see. As far as changes and things that probably could have been improved, I think that some of the shooting could be improved slightly. There's definitely, despite the base reticle, I don't really like the base reticle, and I'm sure they'll add. It's hard to be this nitpicky in an alpha because who knows what they're going to add in the future or what they're going to work on. Because I'm sure accessibility options and all that isn't really the priority for a closed alpha playtest. But I think, adding more reticle and improving the shooting a little bit to make it feel a little bit better. And then the one thing that I think that probably needs to be investigated sooner rather than later is what to do with the TTK. I think that in a class-based game with abilities and high movement and traversal, I think it makes sense to have a time to kill that is a little bit slower. So you have a chance to use the abilities, positioning matters more, and then using the environment with the gas and all those things starts to matter a lot more. But I will say there were several times during the game where it felt like the TTK was a little bit, just slightly too long. There are many times where you're shooting and you'll probably, if you watch any of the gameplays I have up on my channel, there's definitely times where I'm like, he's still alive. How is he still alive? It's like you empty several clips into them and they still feel like they're still going. There's still moments of a very fast time to kill. Like if you get the double barrel at high rarity and you get close on someone, you can double shot them. There's definitely some moments where you can get them caught into a gas field or you have 3 maxed out melee blood increases and you have the purple katana or the purple blades and you can really 3-shot someone very quickly, even with the dash from the double blades. So there's definitely some things that there's definitely some fast TTK areas in there, but a lot of the combat starts to feel there's times where it feels a little slow, and I'm wondering what they're going to do about that. Maybe they add more weapons, maybe they change that, or maybe this is exactly what they wanted, but it's something that stuck out to me quite a lot in the game as feeling a little bit sluggish. But we'll see kind of just how that plays out. They may have plans for it, or maybe this is what they'd like, and it's just something you adjust to. But it definitely plays with having abilities a lot better because it means you get a chance to use them. You wouldn't really want Call of Duty time to kill where you can die in under half a second, right? Because then you wouldn't be able to melee, you wouldn't be able to use abilities, you wouldn't be able to run around. So there's definitely a fine line to run there, but it did stick out to me as a point of feedback. Overall, I'm looking forward to seeing more about the game. I'm looking forward to playing more of the game during the next playtest and how that goes. But I think there's some good stuff here, and there's plenty of reason to be excited for it if you're a Battle Royale fan, or if you're even a Vampire the Masquerade fan. I think they did a good job on both fronts. So that's going to be it for the thoughts on this game, this playtest, and the alpha. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed yourself. If you did, leave a like down below, and I'll see you in the next one.